Now, a big day in Strasbourg today in the European Parliament, a big vote on the EU Migration Pact. Now, this problem afflicted the European Union back in 2015 as large numbers of young people started to cross the Mediterranean. I was there in the Parliament and I warned them, if the EU asylum policy means that anybody that sets foot on EU soil is allowed to stay, you will be headed for a disaster. Well, of course, no one listened to me. Today, the Parliament has passed a series of measures that basically say, still, anyone that comes, whether it's across the sea or through the eastern land border, will be allowed to stay. Last year, 1 million people came into the European Union from outside. And basically what it's saying is that through solidarity, member states will share the burden for those that come across the water or come through the land borders. And if you don't take your quota, you'll be fined €20,000 for every migrant you refuse to take. Now, it passed in the European Parliament, albeit not by very big margins. Folks, I promise you, this idea of EU unity and solidarity is going to collapse. That's my view. I'm joined down the line by Paolo Borchia, member of the European Parliament for Italy's Lega party. Now, how did Lega vote on the EU Migration Pact?
Hello, Nigel, and thanks a lot for inviting me. Well, we are very skeptic. We are not happy about these measures. I think this package is not sufficient, and especially it won't be able to stop that a lot of people leaves Africa towards Europe. I don't think it's. I see a lot of propaganda, but. My party, my political group, several common sense amendments in order to try to improve these files, but I don't think it will be sufficient. So Lega in general is against this package because it's not sufficient in our view. There are several files. Some files are not so bad, and they will work in order to have a common database and other instruments in order to contrast illegal immigration. And so we were able to support just a few files, but in general we are not happy. I think that honestly, Italian government made a quite good contribution, quite good proposal, but you know that. Sometimes compromises are not the best way to achieve good results.
Well, of course, and nothing in this. I mean, in some ways, you're on the front line of this. You've got Lampedusa and other parts of Italy which take the boats directly. But as you say, I can't see anything in this migration pact that stops the flow of boats continuing to come to Lampedusa.
Yes, but just wait and see what happens when. The weather will improve in next weeks because Italy, like Greece or like Spain, are the most exposed countries at the geographical level, and so I get the impression that years pass by, but the same talks, but the talks are the same, but no concrete solutions. Because if we the matter is that Brussels is trying to privilege ideology, is trying to make some maquillage to show that some good solutions are fine. But in my opinion, I don't think that we will see something new for contrasting illegal immigration, because from one side we are very open to people that would like to work to integrate, but in general. I think that, figures are telling us that no space enough in Europe for everybody. I'm sorry.
I think, Paolo, your position is very clear indeed. Thank you for joining me tonight after that significant vote today. Now, I'm joined down the line by Anand Menon, Director of UK Interchanging Europe and a regular on this show. Anand, let's think about the sort of politics of this. Solidarity, that was the word that was being championed. And actually, if you look at the votes, they weren't passed by particularly big margins. And already Donald Tusk, The man that used to be in charge of the European Council, but is now, of course, the Prime Minister of Poland, has said we will not agree to this pact. Unsurprisingly, Viktor Orban from Hungary has had the same. I'd be very surprised if Slovakia, maybe the Czech Republic, didn't join in short order. I'm just very struck that this word solidarity today, of all days, is pretty meaningless.
Well, it's a word they like to throw around inside the European Union. But I mean, the fact is, there's a reason it's taken 10 years for the European Union to get to this point, because there's massive disagreement. And we've just heard why. Some states are more exposed than others. The states that aren't exposed are thinking, well, hang on a sec, why should we volunteer to be part of this? Why, we don't need to take these people. They're arriving in Italy. It's Italy's problem. So what they've tried to do there's two things going on here, aren't there? There are elections coming up, and the sort of what like to call themselves the mainstream European parties are keen to give the impression of doing something in a very similar way that Rishi Sunak is keen to get a plane to take off to Rwanda before our election, to give the impression of action. But the second thing is they've got a very, very fragile compromise here. And even though it might well pass the member states at its final stage, when it's actually called upon to work, I think what you'll see is a lot of member states, as we've heard, simply refusing to take people. And then the interesting question is whether they'll pay the fines or not.
Yeah, fragile, I think, is exactly the right word for today's agreement. And you've mentioned already the fact that from June the 6th to June the 9th, the European elections are coming up. They'll be the first European elections I've not stood in for 30 years. But we're going to see some potentially quite big changes, aren't we, in the makeup of the European Parliament?
Potentially, yes. I mean, a combination of factors. It's partly immigration, it's partly sclerotic economic performance, that it looks like in many cases mainstream parties are going to take something of a beating in these elections. Now, this could be significant. You never know. I mean, you know as much about European elections as anyone, but the fact is political scientists call them second order elections, which means in some countries people feel freer to go out and punish the incumbents because they don't really think these elections matter. So there's not necessarily a very clear read over from European elections to national elections. But I think in many national capitals, the sort of mainstream parties are going to be looking at the results with a degree of concern, because opponents who generally don't do very well, I think, are going to see their results look pretty good after these European elections, whether it's in Germany or France or a number of other countries. Yeah,
it is a bit of an open shot on goal. I get that. But it also gives people the chance to vote for what they believe in, is another way of looking at it. And I think, looking at the farming protests across Europe, there is now quite a growing mainstream Eurosceptic, maybe not yet saying leave the European Union, but Euroscepticism is growing, isn't it?
Yeah, at the moment, it would seem that it is. I mean, you're absolutely right to distinguish between Euroscepticism, saying this isn't working, and let's leave the European Union. But I think there is a sort of movement in the European Union now. And Viktor Orban is the clearest example of someone who says, I'm going to stay in the European Union. I'm going to change it from within. I'm going to make life difficult. I'm going to not accept things that I don't think are good for my country. And you could imagine a situation down the line, if you have those sorts of governments in place in several member states, where it becomes very, very difficult for the European Union to actually accomplish anything at all. I mean, none of this is a foregone conclusion. I mean, politics is unpredictable. It might be that the economy picks up. And I do think economic performance is key to this, or a lack of economic performance. But at the moment, it certainly looks like those kinds of Eurosceptic governments might be gaining a little bit of ground inside the EU.
Yeah, it's going to be a very interesting set of elections. Anna Menon, as ever, thank you for coming on and joining me on the programme. His comment there about Viktor Orban was very interesting. Somebody once said in the European Parliament, Nigel Farage is the European Union's worst nightmare because he wants to leave. Then a year or two later, somebody else said that maybe Viktor Orban is the European Union's worst nightmare because he actually wants to stay. But one government on its own can't do a lot. If there were several across the EU, the whole thing would simply cease to work. And I still believe, as I've always believed, that the days of this artificial political structure are numbered.